the topic today was designed to raise everybody out of their normal doom and gloom and introduce you to my personal hero, who has been responsible for all sorts of good things, I'm sure. But anyway, that's just to sort of put you on edge so that you feel the anticipatory excitement of knowing what's going to come, or not, as the case may be. So, as well as Jackie, we've got James just arriving. And we've reached the magical 5-minute mark. So, following Andrew's belief that the best way of getting people to join you is to start talking, and then all the latecomers arrive. So we'll start. Let me just ask, first of all, if anyone has any points that they'd like to raise or discussions to go to keep this lively as a banter session. Don't all rush forward at once, take your time.
I've got one.
Well done, Amanda. That wasn't predictable at all.
Oh, what are you saying? No, I wanted to give great credit to the great collaboration. I have been hearing nothing but how well things are going in East Anglia and Cambridge, that area. And just wanted to say very well done. And I hope that we hear a little bit more about it later on.
Oh, I'm sure it'll be a topic all of its own, Amanda. It does seem to be picking up a huge amount of momentum. So
well, I've heard of it over here in the Cotswolds, how well it's going. And SLCC, the Society of Local Council Clerks, I had a session with them yesterday, and it sounded really exciting. And like what I'm saying now is about FOMO.
Yes.
You know that you're onto something when people are desperate to be involved because they think they're missing out. And you seem to have reached that critical mass over there where, a lot of people are now interested, not because they're interested, but because they fear what they're missing out. And I think that is not a bad way to go.
Is that Amanda from the trial, the Great Collaboration Trial in East Anglia? Okay, brilliant. I didn't realize it had started even. So I haven't yet got that message.
But Amanda, it hasn't started. It's just this is all the groundwork.
Okay.
But Amanda, in answer to your question, we will not be editing that out of the video. That's too important.
I'm so pleased.
All right, so let me. You're going to be playing a game today, which involves audience participation. So fingers ready on buzzers, teams, and we'll go in to see what we can do. So I'm going to share my screen and go to there and go to there and go to there and there. So as you can all now see that you are indeed in outer space. And the reason for this is about to become very clear. So I'm going to set the scene for you. We've gone back in time to something like September in Philadelphia in 1980. You're all in a university lecture hall, so you can picture a place with tiered seats, looking a bit like an amphitheater, looking down on the main lecture sort of spot in the middle, which is currently empty, but you've got about 40 or 50 people around you from all over the world. And now we're about to start the day. So I should have mentioned to you, it's quite early in the morning, about 9 o'clock in the morning. And out comes a gentleman who announces that he's in charge today. And he's standing between these two large revolving chalkboards. Now, I don't know if you remember the chalkboards, but they rotate like some of the advertising banners you see at bus stops and so forth. So you can get a lot of writing on them. And out comes with him 2 assistants ready to write down things on the board. Now, each of you should consider yourself now as the captain of a spaceship, and you wake up one morning and you just have this sixth sense that something is not quite right. So then the question is, what? So all the instruments are working fine and show that everything is as it should be. Your officers on watch believe that everything is working just fine. The crew isn't mutinying just yet. So you don't know what the problem is, but you just have this nagging feeling that all is not well. So what are you going to do? And this is the audience participation bit, because you need to tell me what you would do under such circumstances. And by all means, leap in, say whatever you like, ask questions, do what you would. I'm ready, poised to write. Well, I'm not really, but you know what I mean.
Keep on high alert.
Okay, high alert.
Get more data.
Ah, now we're
Yes,
talking.
research.
Yes, there's a good answer. On any specific subjects?
All relevant ones.
That is a real weasel answer. Goodness gracious me.
I think I'm a politician.
Politician.
Yes, you're up in a spaceship. Come on.
Ask other crew members how they feel.
Yes, well, they've all told you they don't think there's anything wrong. You're just being a paranoid captain.
Now you need to look out of the windows in every
What?
direction.
Well, okay, yes. Now what?
Pray.
Let me give you a clue or two, all right? How long are you going to be able to stay up there? If something's broken and doesn't work, you may be crippled. So what's your life cycle going to be like? So do you have any air? Do you have any water? Do you have any fuel? Or how long are these things going to last up there?
So check your supplies.
Yes, thank you. Excellent. So supplies of what?
Food.
Yes.
Life-saving stuff.
Good.
Gin?
Yes.
Chocolate.
Space suits.
I did say this would be a light-hearted session. I didn't say it was going to be frivolous.
Water.
Water, yes, very good. What drives your spaceship along? What stops you from falling down to Earth?
Fuel.
Yeah, exactly. You've got fuel, you've got engines. Do they work? You have machines for making water for you. Are they all in good shape? You've got spares for them, all that sort of stuff. So I can see I've got your undiluted attention, so let's move on. So these are the sorts of things that I would have put in had I been up there in this spaceship. And remember, of course, I have done this, so this is not news to me. So those sorts of questions, which you did mostly come up with after a little bit of prompting. And back in Philadelphia in 1980, the audience did need the prompting. But once they got rolling with questions, these 40 or 50 people completely filled both boards. So a lot of thought went into this, a lot of questions from people, all of which needed answers. So then they say, well, actually, your spaceship is Spaceship Earth. And all the questions that you've raised need to be asked in terms of our globe. And so let's rethink this a little with our whatever year we're in now, 2024 hats on. And we've taken the questions that we asked back in the 1980s, given them modern sort of climate, environment change types of titles, and then put some topics in here to think about. Because these are all the things that we are thinking about all the time, those of us who are working on these sorts of projects and topics and things. So in particular, a lot of this seems to be common sense, but it hasn't been universally adopted yet. So most of us know that the most inefficient way of using land is to put cattle on it, in terms of beef cattle. But I'm not quite sure what the dividing line is between the energy created by things like pigs when you eat them compared to what happens when they're growing themselves. But we do know that we should all be eating many more vegetables. And no one seems to be worried about losing insects just yet. So maybe we should be thinking about eating insects as they do in some Asian countries.
And snakes.
Well, there you go.
So we're killing the insects.
So I've just discovered that.
Yes, yes. Well,
I've just
there's rather a lot of them, I think, compared to, say, cattle. Or
I've just
let's
discovered
say they don't use much damage to the climate or to
we're
the
using glyphosates
yes.
on
Well, that
around
comes down
landfills.
under, yes, that comes down under cleanliness down here. So
Oh, okay.
agricultural pollution, absolutely glyphosate, yes. But you know, people nowadays tend to be wearing man-made clothes or materials. There was nothing wrong with wool when I last looked at it, and it's certainly a lot warmer. You can turn down your thermostat if you wear wool.
Not in, if I may, and say that the other reason to wear wool and natural products is because of the pollution to the rivers and our water source. And as a result of microplastics getting into our drinking water, that is causing more risk to human health, even than climate change, in the sense of the emerging evidence being that it's leading to some of our increases in health illnesses and so on.
Yeah. So basically, you're getting the point, which is that we've got to change the habits and attitudes of people if we're going to succeed in turning around this spaceship and getting your nagging worry dealt with. And a lot of what we're going to be talking about, what we're working with, the Great Collaboration, is getting people to work together, which is what you're going to see shortly, is that this is particularly powerful and perhaps more powerful than you realize. Some stuff, the Economist recently ran a climate episode, I guess, in which they said that it's actually quite encouraging to see what the non-governmental people are doing. So there are people who are building electrolyzers which are going to produce green hydrogen. And it's all working pretty well, but they just haven't scaled it up yet. So, you know, the current largest electrolyzer in the world, I think, produces about 50 tons worth of hydrogen a year, but they need more than 1,000 tons per unit to be effective. But they're getting there. So, and carbon capture and so forth is beginning to look like it might have some effect, and so on we go. So things are getting better, but we do have major issues, as we're all aware. So let's go back to that world game in 1980 and see what happened. So it was started by a guy called Bucky Fuller, who is this hero of mine. And he basically felt that part of the problem with the world, and funnily enough, he analyzed the world's issues in a way that sound remarkably similar to all of the issues that we're facing today. And this was 40, 50 years ago. But in order to help resolve the issue, he devised the game to let people all over the world play and see if they could come up with better ideas than the politicians and governments were dealing with. And his major issue, lots of issues he had, but he just had issues with people and their popular beliefs. And this scaled up to entire countries. So just think about how we consider everything. You teach all your children that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. So you're lying to them from day one because the sun doesn't go anywhere. You need to teach them about the rotation of the earth. Everywhere we look around us, buildings are rectangular, above ground, and built in the most inefficient way, as we'll see in a second. So why? And one of the big issues is that people think of the world as they see it on Mercator maps. So what's wrong with Mercator maps? Well, here's a Mercator map. All right. So Alaska is bigger than Mexico. Greenland is the same size as Africa. And none of those facts actually exists. Because in fact, in the scale of Africa versus Greenland, there's an error of 14 times. What is good about Mercator are the compass directions. So useful if you happen to be traveling around the world, but for getting an idea of what's going on in the world, this is very misleading. What you really need is what Buckminster Fuller created, which was a map that shows everything in the proper scale. So now here you've seen Greenland, and here is Africa, 14 times larger. And and you get a completely different view of the world and its scale. So, for instance, had people had this map in the Second World War, then the chances are pretty good that the American solution to the Pacific War with Japan would not have been to go island hopping all the way around here, because that's a hell of a long way for them to go. Why not just go straight through Alaska and come down with your Russian allies and hit Japan from here? So anyway, just his view that things change when you look at them more accurately in a way that's more based upon science. So just to show you how he demonstrated this, hopefully you can see this. We can get rid of that. But they're now generating that map from the Birol Mercator sphere. And we're done. All right,
This
so
would be great for my further maths A-level students.
yeah, right. So he thought that part of the problem was in the way we spoke. So that we talk about going up or down, but in the universe, there is no up and down. It's really only in and out, away from gravitational centers. So when you jump into your lift, you don't go up or down. You want to go out or in from the center of the world. And if we stop thinking under these misleading ideas, then does that change the way we think about things? So we don't get sunrise and sunset. We get sunset, sunsight and sun clips, because actually the Earth is bringing the sun into sight and it's eclipsing the sun from our sight as it rotates. Bucky brought up the word livingry, which is he wanted all of science and what we were doing to try and keep things alive rather than to set about killing them. And again, we all talk about worldwide, but worldwide suggests that the Earth is flat because something that's wide is two-dimensional. You should be thinking in terms of world around. So he invented quite a lot of new words, or when you read his books, he writes in extremely long sentences, which are quite difficult to chew your way through, because he was absolutely determined to remove any possibility of ambiguity in the interpretation of his sentences. So this is all part of his saying, let's think about things a little differently and see what that changes. So he took as an example, he was himself incredibly short-sighted, but he grew up in Maine, where there's lots of water and islands and things like that. And as he was sailing his dinghy boat along one day and was looking at the bubbles floating up under the stern and round the rudder, and he thought, well, these are perfect spheres, but we describe them as men in terms of pi, which is a completely unperfect number. You never can get to an end to it. So why? There must be a better way of doing mathematics, for instance. And then we go back to this business of building houses. So the strength of material in tension is way greater than its compression strength. So how do we build houses? We pile them brick on brick, knowing that's the least efficient way of using the brick material. So that's time for a rethink. And he sort of came up, if you will, with the geodesic domes, which is one of his best known things. But he also lived in Kansas, where it gets very hot in the summer. And he worked with his father to produce a house that took advantage of plain, straightforward, ordinary physics to cool it without the need for any air conditioning. And basically, he worked out that hot air rises. So if you make the house of sort of stainless steel, which gets extremely hot, then that hot air rises and it pulls all of the air out of the inside of the house. And you just get lots of air movement without any electricity or anything else like that at all. Sweet and neat. So he came up with this idea of design science for doing things in the most efficient way and getting other people to do them and doing it for the benefit of people. So we're now going to play the world game. Well, we're going to talk about it. We're not going to play it particularly. But the differences were that he wanted people world around to face the facts as they are, as opposed to some of the nonsense that politicians, Amanda, will throw at you. And he also said, just think how many problems would disappear if we managed to get 1 billion brains working on them. Because you can just sort of get rid of stuff in an instant if you think about it hard enough. There's a sort of a calculation somewhere of how many people come up with original thoughts in their lifetime as opposed to having processed other people's things. And comes down to a frighteningly, embarrassingly small number of how many original thoughts has one had. And we'll see at the moment that although it wasn't around in the 1960s and 70s, the internet has really put a lot of his wishes into practice. So let's just show you what the practice was. So remember, we're now back in Philadelphia. It was 9 o'clock in the morning. We spent an hour or two filling up the chalkboards with ideas. So then what happened? Well, you spent the rest of the day being taught more of the thinking, if you will, that's we've been covering this morning. So how can you rethink the way things are with a view of having looked at them as they really are and not as the world tends to think of them? So sunrise, sunset, it isn't sunrise, it isn't sunset. If you changed your view on that, what happens? Bucky Fuller was very interesting. He said he could always tell, and again, remember we're talking about the 70s, he could always tell if a child that he met had been born before or after 1957. Because if you were born after 1957, satellites were old hat, they existed, and you never gave them another thought. If you were born before 1957, they were a marvel, unbelievable. And if you think about nowadays, it's true that for most children, as they grow up, they accept things as they are, and so they don't have any wonder at them. You give them a mobile phone and they think, okay, it's a mobile phone, but no one tells them there's more computing power in this than there was in the computers that we used to send people to the moon with. You have a basement full of supercomputer back in the old days, a huge IBM mainframe computer, much less computing power than you've got in the palm of your hand nowadays. So
Permission to add, if I may,
come
and
on.
that is Amanda. And just very quickly, I did computer science A-level in 1983. And in 1983, we had to take our punch cards and our magnetic tape to the local high street bank to run it on their mainframe because there weren't computers in our college. So it's not a 60s or 70s thing, it's 1983.
Well, yes. So 1983, I think, was also something like them as roughly the start of the IBM PC.
Yes,
I think how that has changed things.
the
So
RML380Z.
well, I had
And the
a
BBC computer.
Radio
and
Shack -80 or TRS-1, I think. Anyway,
I've still got them in my roof.
so enough reminiscing. Let's get on with the thing. So on the second day, you spent the first Saturday, the rest of Saturday, being taught to sort of think in this new way and given a view of facts. And you've also been introduced to a global database of facts. So back in those days, Bucky Fuller said, you remember those questions we were asking about the spaceship? How much food have we got? How much fuel have we got? How much energy is there? And he discovered that the nations of the world were only interested in their own requirements for food and energy. They had no clue as to what was involved in the world as a whole. And in theory, of course, you think, well, maybe that's the job of the United Nations, but there are disadvantages and advantages to the United Nations. And so he decided that there was no organization that was going to look at the world as a whole and think about things in a non-political way. And you come up with very, very different answers. And I mean, one of the things he suggested, for instance, was he was a great believer in sustainable energy, renewable energy, and he thought the time would come when the world would run largely on sustainable, renewable energy. And therefore you had to have wind power. So he said, so where is the windiest place in the world? That's the best place to put your wind turbines. And the best place for wind in the world is Antarctica, but not a very large requirement for electricity down there in terms of global requirement. But he said, look, he said, the big problem with electricity is distributing it, and you get all the heating effects of electricity and the problems of distributing it over large distances. So Antarctica as a wind generator is going to have to be on hold until we resolve the superconducting issue. But once you've got superconducting sorted out, you should be using the high winds of Antarctica. And he came up with things like that. So he would come up with the ideas that would have to wait until the materials world had got around to resolving the issues. And superconducting remains more of a sort of a minus 273 degrees Fahrenheit, or sorry, centigrade type issue at the moment. But one of these days they'll get around to it. But he had lots of other ideas as well, which we'll touch on, I think, coming up. So you spend the whole of the second day split up into groups and working out what it is that you would do to resolve the world issues. And by the way, what are the world issues? So you'd ask yourselves, what's the most important thing that we're faced with at the moment, and come up with the answers. And then in the afternoon, each of your groups of 6 has a speaker who presents the conclusion. Now, these are the sorts of things that they were talking about. I mentioned the children before and after Sputnik. Dome houses. Houses nowadays tend not to be buildable single-handedly, and they're not sort of do it yourself, but you can have a dome house which an individual can put up, no problems. And we go back to the question of, why are all houses nowadays built above ground? You should get yourself out and look at underground houses. They're rather more fun than you might think. And they produce less space, less car traffic, all sorts of things. He came up with a way of using water that produces water in a mist. So remember, this guy grew up in Maine, lots of fog and mist on the sea in Maine. And he discovered that after he'd been out sailing for a day, he came back with a very refreshed face where the mist had cleaned it for him. So he developed a shower which produces a mist rather than a spray of water. And he found that you could get clean by using about a pint of water rather than several gallons for your shower. So how come we aren't all using misters? I've mentioned electricity generation, politics and politicians. I don't know why I meant those. Are trees the best way of removing CO2? Why wouldn't you think about, say, blue carbon, which is using mangroves, seaweed, that sort of stuff, and usually is much more efficient at capturing carbon than green carbon. And lo and behold, he developed a city that can float, because that leaves the land free for agriculture. It's when things are floating and they're high, you can move your delivery boats and so forth underneath them without getting in the way of everybody, without clogging up the roads. And of course, if your city is floating, then you couldn't care less about the rising sea level. That's more fun, really. So all sorts of ideas, and this is what he was trying to do, was to get people attending these games to think more provocatively. So we talked about gathering facts on a global basis. And you know, there's the answer to the question is there really aren't food shortages anywhere. The world has oodles of food. The problem is that the distribution of it, because dictators and autocrats and all sorts of other people get in the way. So most of the problems are human caused, not shortage caused. And so here we are, years later. They did play this game all around the world to all sorts of people. And they came up with very much the same answers all the time, that people, yes, they needed access to clean water, they wanted reasonable shelter, they certainly wanted safety, and they needed food. But surprisingly, nearly everybody just said, leave us alone. We just want to live in peace and get on with our lives the way they are. And what was astonishing, I think, to the Institute, Buckminster Fuller Institute, that played these games, was it didn't matter where they went or who they talked to or what religion they were or what nationality or what color. Everybody wanted the same thing. So how to get it? So what they wanted to do was to get you to start doing things along the line of design science, which is making the most effective use of things. They asked everyone present at the game at the end of the second day, then they asked you all to go away and do what you could to change the world. And the same conclusion was the end of everyone, that if you re-educated people to think in lines of helping each other, of being a good neighbor, of trying to be peaceful, then the problems were solved, and you had to educate people to think that way. So the answer is education, education, education. You think of that as really, when you get round to it, that comes down to the bottom line of everything that we're looking at the moment. So since the 80s, the World Wide Web has arrived. Getting statistics is so much more efficient and effective, but in particular, it's very much easier for the ordinary folk to work together solving problems. And we're back to this business of, if you throw enough minds at a problem, how can it stand up to you? We'll work out a way around it. Nowadays, of course, the environment is a much larger issue in our minds. And we, the people on this call, are the educators in the front line of environmental change. That a lot of what we do, these topics that we have at the banter sessions, for instance, are all given by people who are educating us in ideas that we haven't come across, or that they've come across, they've become experienced in, and they're passing it on. Very beneficial. And I think that that's what we're doing. And in a way, I'm hoping that the great collaboration will be a way for hundreds of thousands of minds to work together on the problems that we're facing. I mean, yes, at the moment it's going to be in this country, but I don't quite see why it needs to stop here once we get rolling. And so I'm just suggesting that we can rethink lots of things. And I think I've lost one more slide. So I haven't been to any planning session at any parish council when anyone said, why is this house being built above ground? But I think it would be quite handy if people did. And I'm suggesting here that people who've never been to one should go and look at an underground house, because by and large, they're phenomenal. If you don't want to go and look at an underground house, then go and visit a dome house and see why it's a better use of materials. Everything in a dome house is operating in tension rather than compression. And so you need much less material to achieve the same degree of safety and protection. And it's costing you a lot less because there are fewer materials. So think what that would do to house prices to anyone who's having a huge problem getting onto the housing ladder nowadays. They'd be enchanted if you offered them cheap, build it yourself dome houses, but you can't tell them to do that until you've been to look at one. Why is green carbon much better known than blue carbon? I suggest that we all need to know a bit more about blue carbon. I went on a sailing trip a couple of years ago up to the Faroe Islands, and they are growing huge amounts of seaweed in the fjords up there. And the amount of carbon that they're absorbing in the oceans there is quite astonishing. So just new ways perhaps of looking at what we're doing in our educational roles of and the many hats that we're wearing as we get on with our daily lives. And thank you. That is the end of that. So having stunned you all into silence, I open the door to discussion, to comments or rude remarks. And oh, look at this. You're away to go, Kirsten. Thank you. You need to unmute, I think, Kirsten.
Oh, I was actually
I beg your pardon. I misinterpreted your icon. Yes, thank you.
Sorry, I'm about to say it wasn't a hand up. I was just applauding you. My apologies.
That's right. Well,
trying to get clever with the emojis.
no, it's my ignorance. No, anyway, there's a genuine hand up from Tristram. So
yeah, I've just got an observation on your second last slide where you said the internet makes it much easier for people to share ideas, and therefore the implication is you come up with solutions. But I don't want to pour cold water on your ideas, but actually, isn't it true that the internet almost creates divisions because people get in gangs and fight each other? And so I think there's sort of slight danger of that. And I just wondered what you thought, because there is a lot of research going into things like underground houses and building houses out of timber, sustainable timber, and all those things. And I think it's not obvious that just people piling in is going to make it work. Isn't it true that you have to have the sort of thought leaders and to create the process, create the change to the planning laws, get the whole thing sort of accepted before it becomes a sort of tsunami of people doing a more responsible thing?
No, Tristram, people are going to view me as having placed your question as the first question because it's such a superb advertisement for the great collaboration.
Yeah.
Whose job it is to go out there and find all the facts on the internet that are facts and support those against all the anti-facts, if you will, or the misleading ones. So absolutely right. Any tool can be misused or abused, and the internet is a huge tool. So I agree with everything you said, but I think what we're trying to create is the recognized go-to place for fact-based answers rather than political or otherwise ideological answers.
Yeah, maybe I expressed it slightly badly, but I think I think it's good to put pressure on them. So the great collaboration allows somebody to say, this, we know now that blue carbon's a good thing, let's go and try to do it. But the gap between that at a sort of parish level and being able to actually do something is, of course, very huge. And what you don't want to do is create a massive amount of animosity of people sort of shouting about this is the best solution. No, it isn't. It's sort of got to be done a bit step by step.
Yep, absolutely right. Couldn't disagree with you. Sorry, couldn't agree with you more.
But thank you very much for your presentation. It was very good. And I like Buckminster Fuller is also a slight hero of mine.
Right, good.
Thank you.
Amanda, could we help you, please?
Yes. You may know that amongst my multiple roles and backgrounds is I've been a classroom teacher for 15 plus years. And before that, I was what my master's degree is in political economics. And one of the things I did was, instead of having the National Health Service, we renamed that the National Illness Service, and then looked at what a true National Health Service would actually be. And one of the ways we did that up in Tyne and Wear was through the Health Action Zone. And so we looked at whole systems events, and I got trained to do residential whole systems events just like this. And we hired, wait for this one, whole football grounds, stadiums, to do this. This is prior to the web being mass available. It was around about the year 2000, that sort of age, when most people weren't comfortable with the internet yet. So we wanted to have truly representative citizens to do citizen science with. And basically, we were trained in how to get them to, all of our breakout groups were a bit bigger than 6, probably 8 to 10, but we used all the director boxes. And we had people moving around the different director boxes and then doing exactly this sort of thing, feeding back, then having another half a day out working on things and then coming back. It was very similar technique. And it was interesting how we then reinvented the National Health Service to keep people healthy, looking at all factors that lead to a healthy life. But you can't have a healthy life without a healthy planet. So some of this overlap came in. And then the other thing I wanted to say was, so there is training in running whole systems events. And I have done that training, albeit a while ago. But that's something that the Great Collaboration maybe could look at. And then the other thing is, in terms of your second to last slide that Tristan just made reference to, I would add there's another progress since, which is in the Envirotech-Science, how much that's progressed, so that things that weren't possible back with the original findings can now maybe be solved technically. So I would just add that to that slide. I just thought it was a fabulous presentation, and thank you.
Do you have a specific environmental techno subject in mind, Amanda, just to let me know what you're thinking of?
Yeah, well, everything from the technology behind wind turbines to distribution of power, what we now know about water, what we now know about all of it. It's kind of insulation properties, how to You know, things like, for example, the original solar panels were so heavy they probably couldn't go on a roof.
Yep.
Whereas now we've got such flexible ones that even could go on listed buildings. You know, it's the world has moved on since this was first done. And if we're talking about that slide where it says how things have progressed, I just think we could add in something there that it's not just that the environment and the need to do something to protect it is largely accepted as an issue. It's also that the science and technology has progressed so much that the use case for it and the cost effectiveness are both now much more in its favour.
Brilliant. Great thoughts, Amanda. Thank you. Yeah, I'll put that
Thank
into the
you.
slide. Thank you.
None of those thoughts would have happened without you hitting the question. So
I know.
it's
I'm still
another really
looking to
good
see that.
question.
I'm still hoping the National Illness Service is coming out. I'm looking forward to that.
My lifelong work.
It's-
Setting up Pure Start centres for the kids. Why on earth was that ever unpicked?
well,
Don't
yes.
get me started. I'm a politician.
All right, well, let's move on to Andrew, please.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks again for that, Graham. Graham and I and others will be talking about it. Everybody connected with this agenda there's so much going on. We can all be very busy. We can have things up to here and things we need to read and so forth. And it's great to be able to step aside now and again, as we have this morning, and think about things afresh. So that's been brilliant. I've made some thoughts in terms of new ways of doing things. Where I live in the Forest of Dean, there's a gentleman doing some, I think the posh word is hydroponics. He's got a warehouse that he's growing sort of salad crops and things inside and all the rest of it, and it's looking very amazing. And there's been bits of this. I think when you look at the David Attenborough film, the recent film that came out a couple of years ago, he's got some pictures of somebody doing something similar in the Netherlands, I believe. Anyway, when I see these things and I think, fine, this is wonderful. It's nice new technology, but what about scale? How affordable is it? Is it really going to be able to be delivered sort of worldwide and all the rest of it? So how does that get managed? I think there is things somewhere along the line about about money, because we're in talk about capitalism. We're in a sort of consumer-based society. We expect to be able to go to the shop and buy stuff, and I've read a book later saying, well, this is all fine, as long as there's stuff to buy, how can these things be, how can our lives, if you like, be more sustainable if we can't always be sure that we're able to go down the road and go into a shop and buy whatever it is, or even order it online? So I think there's an element of that to be thought about. I think there's also things about the capabilities. You've mentioned that Buckminster Fuller had some ideas in advance before the technology was available. I think if anybody invents a better quality electricity battery, the world will be past their doors, because the way of storing electricity, the way of managing to store large amounts of electricity hasn't really seemed to been solved yet. Again, something that costs rather a lot of money. So I think it is good to have ideas and to look for solutions. They won't always come straight away. I firmly believe that every project has its time. There are times when things come forward, and I've seen this happen over many years. I think there's also an issue about continuity, because we can have sessions like we have today. We can have that great session that Amanda has described. What we're wanting to think about now is, how do we start a process for Robin that then keeps going? How do we get something going? If we can't pay for all of these things we might have an idea for, we may not necessarily have the technology, but if we need to keep on at these issues, and we need to keep on thinking about carbon emissions, thinking about sources of food and all the rest of it, how do we manage it? And this is coming back to people and what people like to do. And I think if you're wanting to be a volunteer at something, you can have a commitment to it, but you've also got to be enjoyable. You've got to get some benefit out of it, whether it's personal satisfaction or simply being with other people and all the rest of it. And I think this is something that perhaps needs a bit more airplay. We've come across community groups doing things with climate action. They don't have the structure of a town or parish council, but they're doing it because they're committed to do it. They're enjoying each other's company, and that group can sort of keep them going. So I think that is another challenge, really, is how we actually keep these sorts of things going. We're a bit down on politicians so far today. I used to didn't think politicians were really much, were a bit of a luxury, shall we say. But the thing about politicians is the skill they do have is ability to persuade other people. They're talkers, they're persuaders,
Yep.
and of course, they can persuade people about things we don't necessarily agree with. But I think there are some skills that politicians can bring to what we're talking about today. This is going back to what you're saying, Graham, about education. So that let's share what the stories are that we need to tell, and then we can all do it. And politicians, hopefully, can help with that. That's
Well, I
rather a
must
long
say-
answer to your questions.
Well, I do see in my dreams that the great collaboration becoming a very forceful power for good, for the simple reason that it'll last longer than the 5 years a politician is in effect.
Right.
Hopefully. So we'll see.
Good
So,
point.
Caroline, let's talk to Tring.
Yes. Hi, Caroline, by the way. Good to see you.
Hi, Andrew. Hi, everyone. No, just picking up on what you were saying about communication and how to actually get people engaged. We've just done a program, a training program with the new citizenship project called the Citizen Quest, which I think will be a really interesting thing for the Great Collaboration to look at and work alongside, because they're very much about how we've shifted from a subject mentality where people are done to, which is still, I feel, very much a local council method, to a consumer society, which is basically the cause of a lot of the issues that we're talking about. And that they're now talking about a citizen society, which has been brought up a number of times today. A number of people have mentioned citizenship. And I think it's you got to look at who you're communicating with and how you're communicating. I think it's quite telling, we're all white, middle class, of a certain, all over a certain age, probably at a guess all in our 50s and above. And I think you've really got to, if you see this great collaboration as a thing that is not just reaching people like us, how do you communicate? Is it things like gamifying? I hate that word, but it works. People love games. I actually did have an app where I was reducing my carbon footprint by playing a game. I don't know how it worked, but anyway, it was, they were planting trees for some market research that I was doing. So
have you got a link or anything you can send us, Caroline, to sort of look at this
I can share the
citizenship thing of yours?
project, yeah.
Yeah. Because it does
I-
sound interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's almost like a different thread of the great collaboration. There's some I've got the link, I'll pop that in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
There we go. Yeah, so that's all I wanted to say really, is that the communication piece and the engagement piece is absolutely essential. And there are going to be different levels in which people engage. And we're going to look at that. We're just starting to look at a climate action plan. And I think a massive part of that has to be how we engage our citizens or engage our people as citizens, so that we're not actually doing everything. And I think that's the same thing with the great collaboration. It's not that you want to do everything. You want to be a facilitator. You want to hold space for other people's ideas and plans and projects to evolve from this kind of hub.
Absolutely. So yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I suspect Andrew wants to respond to that.
Well, I absolutely agree. And as the Irish comedian used to say, it's the way you tell them. It's the way you tell them. And there are different audiences out there. I just did a podcast for Warwickshire County Council. I'll speak to anybody, mate. Anyway, and they're doing these podcasts on sustainability. We had one of them on young people and climate change, And I think that's right. So who are the best people from my days as a salesman to speak to anybody? People, like needs to speak to like, if I want to persuade an older white bearded gentleman of something, I'm probably quite a good person to speak to them. But so it goes on. It's not necessarily easy, of course. I mean, we're looking at different ways in which parish and town councils can present themselves. But of course, every area is different, and we need to sort of persevere with that. The other thing which has reminded me to say, Caroline, is that not every town and parish council is in the same place either. So we're busy planning, drafting out the next iteration of the Great Collaboration website in terms of advice to town and parish councils. And we're talking about 5 different stages in the sort of climate journey, 5 different, some of which may overlap. There's a beginning stage. Frankly, some parish chairmen still think it's all a plot by Bill Gates or somebody. There's the declaration stage, declaring an emergency, but also having a biodiversity policy, which is something we then need to look at. There's the doing stage, and I think a lot of town and parish councils are actually doing something that is beneficial in the term of climate change without necessarily realizing it. If you're clearing or encouraging people to clear rights of way, you're improving the likelihood of active travel plans, for example. There's all sorts of different things that we're doing. I think there are things about the net zero bit and reducing carbon emissions in terms of targeting what we're doing. And some councils have actually taken that on, and that where we get into these carbon calculators and so forth. And then the last group we're anticipating is people, councils, parish and town councils who are actively working with their communities on climate action planning. My estimate based on a survey by SLCC last year, there's probably only about 5% of councils are doing that at the moment. Getting together your councils, doing the sorts of discussion sessions that Amanda and Graham have been talking about, finding ways forward, getting people engaged. And I think where we will be looking to be successful, perhaps, is that number increases, because we're saying to everybody, get involved with your local people. Parish clerks, as I know from 8 years at the coalface, are busy types. Let's get more people engaged. And so I'll be fascinated to hear how you get on with Tring and Caroline, and seeing how it goes. It's coming up time for annual parish meetings, isn't it? So that's a good way of getting people engaged to start with.
Yes. Well, thanks, Andrew. And in terms of your comment about white bearded people talking to white beards, I think you just rescued single-handedly the entire wig industry, and we'll all have different ways to speak to our different audiences.
This is real, by the way. This is real.
I know that Eamon has to leave in a minute or two. Just wanted to check whether anyone else has any comments or points they wish to raise before we pack up for the day. Good. Well, thank you all very much for your time, and much appreciated. I'm glad you were able to join us and come up with some fascinating input. And we'll see you all next week. And next week, the topic is going to be whatever Dilys wants it to be. We can't talk to Dilys until she gets back from her train journey around Europe. And I'm not yet convinced that she will have Wednesday at noon next week free. But at the moment, we're hoping to hear from Dilys in Dorset on the subject of, amongst other things, 20-mile-an-hour speed limits. So I just give you that as anticipation for what's to come. So thank you all very much. Have a very great rest of the week, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.